So I would like to welcome all of you behind your screens on behalf of the organizers of the Estuarial Political Forum, and thank again Professor João Carlos Espada and Rita Seabra Brito and their team for a remarkable performance in making the Estuarial Political Forum possible in spite of the circumstances. Of course, we are not in Estuarial, we're not in June, it's not sunny, and we are in our freezing offices, but we are very happy to meet today. And as I can see, because I've already had a number of messages on Hoover, we are all becoming experts. And the crisis, I think, has succeeded in forwarding some of us into the digital world for the best, in my case. Today, for the Charles de Gaulle Memorial Lecture, we are very honored and very privileged to receive the Ambassador of France, Her Excellency Florence Mangin, on a capital subject, France and European sovereignty. This is a prescient subject, as a recent poll has shown that 58% of the French think that the European project is doomed. But when President Macron, in September 2017, expressed his wish to rebuild a sovereign, united and democratic Europe for 2024, there were expressions that, in fact, this would be a force for good. So how much has the strikes in France last winter and COVID this summer and this spring set the project back? I would also like to say that in January 2020, which now seems like years ago before confinement and restrictions, the French Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Yves Le Drian, gave another meaning to 21st century European sovereignty in calling for a European digital sovereignty based on, I quote, cybersecurity, our capacity to innovate, our role as a standard-setting power, and the protection of the common goods which are shared through open digital European infrastructures. I am certain that we will be able to discuss all of this after the speech given by the ambassador. But first, I will give the virtual floor to Dr. Cynthia Salum from the NATO Defense College, who is also a great specialist of René Aron that we were very pleased to listen to last year, for her to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here on this panel and also to introduce Madame l'Ambassadeur. If you allow me, I will take the time to go through your parcours. It's always very interesting, beside the diplomatic status that you as a speaker have, to see a little bit and cover the topics on which you have been working throughout your career. It also inspires a Q&A session. So you are the ambassador of France to Portugal and was the director of the Continental Europe Directorate at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, working on areas as the Balkans, Russia and neighboring countries, South Caucasus and Central Asia. And that between 2015 and 2019, you were appointed senior official for equal rights at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2017. Prior to this, Madame l'Ambassadeur was coordinator for cybersecurity and open data with the Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Development, but also Director of Institutional Relations and European and International Cooperation at the Caisse des Dépôts et Consignations, and Ambassador Permanent Representative of France to the United Nations and international organizations in Vienna between 2009 and 2012. The variety of topics that you actually cover, Madame, give you a very much interesting outlook from a meso and macro perspective on the challenges that we face at the level of Europe and European sovereignty building, if I can say so. Now, within the European Union, you held the following offices: Minister Counselor at the French Embassy in Rome, in Italy, Deputy Director in charge of mission on the Union's institutional future in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs earlier on, between 2002 and 2004, Technical Advisor for European Affairs in the Office of the Prime Minister in Paris, and so on and so forth. I want to highlight that you also worked in Southern Western Africa as a first secretary at the French Embassy in Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire, between 86 and 88. But you were also responsible for the Southern Africa Service and the Directorate of African and Malagasy Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 84 and 86. Madame, you have a master's degree in history from the University of Paris 1, La Sorbonne, also studied at University Center for European Studies at Paris 4 Sorbonne. He attended the Paris Institute of Political Studies in '83 and the National School of Administration in 1992. Allow me to tell you that it's quite rare to have profiles that at the same time have been through l'université publique, a public university, at the same time our very specific formats of l'ENA and Sciences Po, and for this it's also an interesting path. Madame l'Ambassadeur, you were decorated as official of the National Order of Merit in 2014 and the Knight of National Order of the Légion d'Honneur in 2010. It's our honor to listen to you now for 20 minutes.
Boa tarde a todos. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's a great pleasure to me to participate to these meetings in Estoril, virtually. This place and moment of discussion and reflection is all the more invaluable in a time when we are wondering a lot about the future, and our present is being turned upside down by many critical changes, not least the COVID-19 pandemic. It's also a great pleasure to be taking part in these discussions under the patronage of Charles de Gaulle, a historical figure, but one who has never been as topical as in these times of increasing geopolitical disruption, when the notions of independence, power, and sovereignty, obsession de Gaulle held so dear, are taking on their whole meaning again, with a very different view than the one they had in the past. Indeed, at a time when there is an increasing number of crises and challenges, whatever the views of de Gaulle, who had announced that he wanted to tear up the 1957 Treaty of Rome if he returned to power, and at the end he maintained and supported it, the sovereignty and independence of France, as of other member states, today depend on Europe. A sovereign, democratic, united Europe in the words of President Macron, as Catherine reminded. Today, more than ever, the essential challenge for Europe is to assert itself more effectively through its values and interests to determine its future. Otherwise, it will see its destiny decided by others. That's what this European sovereignty means. Indeed, what we are witnessing today is a world which has changed and which is characterized by a growing brutalization of international life against the backdrop of a challenging of multilateral regulatory frameworks and an increase in power politics. We are seeing destabilization become an instrument of power in its own right. And in Ukraine, Syria, Libya, and Nagorno-Karabakh today, we see these harmful trends making crises which originated locally international and fanning their flames. We are seeing a weakening of multilateralism, which is today suffering from a triple chronic disease. First, the temptation of unilateral withdrawal. Second, an approach of systematic obstruction, which affects the international community's ability to act. And third, attempts to exploit situations for the benefit of private interests. This is a very basic observation, but it is true that for a long time, we didn't want to face up this reality. For too long, we believed that thanks to a sort of European exception, we could escape the perils of this new global context. Yet, Europe today risks being marginalized and transformed into a theater of influence. We Europeans are now at a crossroads and faced with a very clear choice: to be wiped out of our own history or assert ourselves, assert our European sovereignty. In other words, we've got to assert our ability to make the choices that have a lasting impact on the future of our societies and determine the place we occupy on the international stage. Assert our ability to work out a third way, a European one, by which Europe accepts responsibility for its role through its values and its interests. And that is to say, it gives itself the tools to determine its future. That's what the European sovereignty means. But I would like to clarify 2 points straight away. Firstly, we must not build this European sovereignty as a substitute for our national sovereignties. But in addition to it, it is not designed to replace them. On the contrary, it emanates from them and builds on them. European sovereignty, far from weakening national sovereignties, works with them, strengthens them. It is now even one of the conditions of our shared independence in a world where none of us could carry weight alone up against the new powers. In other words, European sovereignty is dependent on the strength of nations. Secondly, I would like to remind that asserting this European sovereignty has nothing to do with sovereignism, protectionism, or autarky. The goal is not to shut ourselves away. Exchanges provide an opportunity for Europe, and I recall that openness is part of the DNA of Europe. Solidarity today is even a condition of collective effectiveness. It is also one of the great contradictions of today's world. These unilateral trends are occurring in a world characterized by interdependence on a huge scale and challenge which we can meet effectively only by working together. Terrorism, the fight against global warming and the erosion of biodiversity, or the challenge posed by the digital revolution. The assertion of European sovereignty, this third way, is valid for every sphere. And I will give some examples of these different spheres. First, I'm thinking of the recovery plan agreed on in principle last July. In this recovery plan, Europe made a virtual quantum leap by resorting for the first time in history the collective borrowing in support of our economies, which will enable us to invest in the ecological and energy transition and the digital transformation. This European decision has been historical in the integration process. This will benefit our citizens, our business and employment in sectors that are of paramount importance for the European Union's security and sovereignty. Second example, at industrial level, by relocating onto our European soil the production of certain strategic assets. And the pandemic has made us aware of this necessity. This also applies to Europe's coordination in the screening of foreign investment in the most sensitive fields. Third example, it applies to access to our internal market with measures to combat distortions of competition, whether they come from companies subsidized by third states or firms that don't comply with the rules we set ourselves for reducing CO2 emissions. It applies as well to foreign trade to reinforce the reciprocity principle and total compatibility with the demands of the Paris Agreement. It also applies to legal protection of our business with cross-European work to respond more effectively to extraterritorial measures by some of our partners. Another example is the digital transformation. In order, we are no longer reliant on the technology of others and standards we have not decided on ourselves. The digital sector, let me stress on that, has become today an area which is essential to our sovereignty. And together, we must devise a form of European digital sovereignty that is both effective and in line with our values, in order not only to strengthen security in cyberspace, but also to win the battle of innovation by identifying critical areas like artificial intelligence and 5G. To that regard, the speech of union by Ursula von der Leyen last month was very, very important because she was very clear on this challenge on digital sovereignty. And she made some concrete proposals and for us, it's a subject of attention, and I do hope that it will convey member states to be more ambitious in the future in that matter. Finally, it applies, and it's absolutely essential, to the field of external relations, where Europe must emerge from the background, assert itself and accept that it is already a power. Today, it is no longer as the choice. For a long time, Europe was turned in on itself and its internal worries alone. Today, it must agree to have an external agenda if it wants to go on carrying weight. The time where economic Europe was enough is really over. Specifically, this means stepping up our fight to defend multilateralism and to open up a third way, enabling the international community not to be the playing field or the passive theater for the battle being waged between the United States and China. It also means strengthening defense Europe through permanent structured cooperation, the European Defence Fund and the European Intervention Initiative in particular has made significant progress, and we must move forward on this basis. It also means our getting more involved in handling crises that profoundly impact our security. I would like to mention the Eastern Mediterranean, the Sahel, Libya, and more generally, the African continent, where beyond the crisis, we must build a more balanced relationship. Finally, it means asserting the power of our model in this competition of values, which today is one of the major dimensions of international competition. A humanist model based on a certain idea of humanity and its dignity, based on the protection of basic rights, the rule of law, the fight against discrimination and racism, and support for the most vulnerable. And we know how much in Portugal this last item is important. A model whereby diverse national histories and cultures coexist. That is something new for Europe, but it is the condition for not staying on the sidelines, for devising this third way with our partners all over the world, for showing it is possible to change the course of events that are presented as inexorable. Global warming, migration tragedies, inequalities, and health, whose importance the pandemic has emphasized more than ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madame l'Ambassadeur. I just have a doubt. Catherine, would you like the floor or do you want me to intervene right away?
You can start, but first of all, I would like to thank Her Excellency for this speech, which allows us to actually carry on the discussion which was started yesterday that I was also chairing, or not chairing, hosting, which really expressed the fact that if during the crisis the member states were left to act, in fact, in some sort of way, this crisis, and this is what you're saying, has been a sort of opportunity for Europe. And Cynthia, if you allow me to ask a question first, my question is essentially, I think that perhaps it is an opportunity for the EU, but I was also wondering if this is also made possible because of Brexit.
Thank you very much. This necessity for Europe to build a new sovereignty, more strength and more independence has taken with the crisis of COVID-19 a higher feature, but it was on the table before. And if we had not the COVID, the challenge would have remained more or less in the same dimension. It's very interesting to recall that the President Macron has been elected on a European program. And it was not easy, as you know, but it was the matrice was Europe. And with the speech of the Sorbonne you referred to, he laid on the table different bricks on which we speak now, we speak today. Of course, the crisis has created an opportunity, you're right, to be more aware of the fragility of a weak Europe. But before the crisis, the sanitary crisis, the confrontation between China and the United States was another element that made us Europeans aware that we had to take, I would not say the power, but a power. So it was, there are some elements which are on the table for a long time. Brexit will affect, of course, everybody in Europe. And we are sad about that, but it's a democratic choice and we have to address it as such. But the fact that the Great Britain is leaving is maybe an element of this awareness of the necessity to be stronger. In any case, in international and security matters, UK will continue to be a partner, surely. Defense, international order in security, we will continue. You know that France and UK has a specific relationship with the Saint-Malo Agreement, which have been a very important condition to build a European defense. And of course, we will continue to work with them on that type of matter. But the fact that there is one member leaving gives to the rest of Europe a better sense of the necessity to be more vocal and to create the tools of a power which is stronger. And really, I mentioned in my intervention the speech of the State of Union by the President of Commission, which was a new exercise, and in which she showed a real vision for the future of Europe, a program, some very tangible ideas in order to make Europe more stronger. And the very tangible proposals, I think, are key. We maybe in the past we have spoken a lot and done not too much. The challenge for the citizens now, and we saw it during the last European Parliament scrutiny, the challenge is to show that Europe is able to put some actions, tangible actions, concrete tools on digital transformation, on health, on security, in order to be at the level of the challenges. And I think the work going on with the new Commission, with the new Parliament, with the new President of the European Council is really devoted to this identification of concrete, tangible initiatives in order to show that there is the speech, it's okay, but we have to deliver on very tangible actions in order to reconcile people and Europe.
So in fact, what is strange is that we are seeing that perhaps historians in the future will come to see the crisis of COVID as a sort of another stepping stone towards a renewal of the European project, essentially. And I hope this will be the case. Yes. Yeah. Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Madame l'Ambassadeur, I was very pleased to see that you have started with this idea about how Charles de Gaulle is never as topical as he might be now. And you're totally right. First, I want to thank you for this very much strategic and political comprehensive analysis of the challenges that Europe is facing, both internally and externally today. And starting from your starts, meaning de Gaulle's position, from a strategic perspective, you are right. I do think that today he is probably more than ever right, in the sense that in his exchanges and interaction conversations, for instance, in the early 60s, late 50s with Adenauer, for instance, he was trying to convince him that European cause is quite specific to the interests and the challenges of the European continent. And let me please directly put the elephant in the room on the table, and that the American cause is not always necessarily the European cause, and actually inversely. So it's interesting for me to have a little bit your feedback on this. We see today, and I can testify for it, by working for NATO at the NATO Defense College in Rome, how much the transatlantic link is at the same time important but challenged by these divergences of interests, but also I would say unheated divergences of interest, because in some ways the United States has to act in some places of the world that are far remote from Europe, and Europe has to take more charge of its surrounding neighborhood. So I would like to have your reaction about this point, if you may, and maybe also highlight, because we are in this de Gaulle Memorial Lecture, that even Charles de Gaulle in '63 was ready to negotiate French sovereignty precisely for European sovereignty. So we do understand that there is no cancellation of national sovereignties by the building up of European sovereignty, on the condition that there is actually a spirit of alliance on interest and priorities within Europe. So maybe you can react to these 2 points to start. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You're totally right. The notion of independence, which was absolutely core in the de Gaulle's thought and action, has been dealt in the past in a very different way, in which nowadays we promote it. During the time by de Gaulle, independence maybe has been seen as a contradiction to national between national and European. And it's true that he has promoted mainly, or maybe more visibly, the notion of national independence. And his attitude towards EU has been diverse, a little bit ambiguous, because of this promotion of national independence. Nowadays, I would say that there is a clear understanding in France.
Madame Ambassador, we have lost your voice now.
Voilà.
That's right.
Yes,
Voilà. Yes, that's right.
So nowadays, there is a great difference in France and in many other European member states. European independence and national independence are not anymore seen as two faces of the same medals, but I would say the same one. And in the method, it has an impact. The promotion of independence, of sovereignty, is made not opposing one country to another, but on the contrary, creating the conditions of alliances inside EU, because we know that working and deciding at the level of 27 is not easy. So more and more, we built some smaller alliances to promote an idea, an initiative, an action, with the hope that others will gather this initiative or this idea. And I think this element of method, speaking with absolutely everybody, even if we are not, we don't agree on the same topic, and we have divergences. In the past, when we had divergences with a country, we tended to ignore the problem. Nowadays, and really it's a feature of the French diplomacy, is to speak with everybody, and especially the one with whom we don't share everything, and try to overcome the different nuances in order to create something together. And it is a great difference between the time of de Gaulle and now and the current time, to have a more collective approach, and especially in a moment in which, and I come to your observation, in which the United States have decided to alter the multilateralism and to quit some multilateral and international institutions. So it's very, very important. It's a patient work. It's a long-lasting attitude, but to convince, to gather, to speak to everybody, to promote the dialogue, even when you are not in favor, you don't share the same ideas, in order to build these notions of independence, sovereignty, and power in Europe. It's important. On transatlantic linkage, you're right, it has been altered. But for us, it's absolutely important to keep it, to renew it, and you are more specialist about NATO than I am. But of course, for us, the construction of a European pillar of defense and security is absolutely an element of the transatlantic relationship. We don't see, on the one hand, transatlantic umbrella and EU initiatives in defense. It is absolutely that Europe will be a greater actor of NATO if it is stronger in its security and defense, and we have achieved remarkable progresses in defense and in security. They are not very much visible because they are a little bit technocratic, institutional, but the fact that we have a defense fund, a defense budget, the initiative for European interventions, many OPEX missions with a large number of European soldiers, all that form an element which is very important, not only for Europe, but for NATO. And of course, we are deceived about some decisions by our American partners on multilateralism, but we don't think it's a reason to abandon. On the contrary, and we have launched many initiatives to promote multilateralism, even if it has been challenged by others.
Of course. I'm sorry, I just want to fill in with a question that is actually related to the NATO question from Michael Sanfi that suggests that the proposed European third way that you mentioned, Madame, is in the area of defense precisely is maybe inconsistent with NATO. So, well, you have partially answered this, but I would like maybe to build up a little bit on that element. Obviously, when we want to speak about the transatlantic link, we put on the one hand Europe and on the other the United States. But then again, when we want to speak about building European defense, then we realize that the European panel is diverse, contradictory, intentions are not the same, interests are not the same, and capabilities are not the same. So basically, if Europe has to become, as you have very well said it, more of a hard power to some extent, it has to assume this new role and to compensate for the years in which it maybe also relied on the United States that was taking the hard power job and letting Europe be, let's say, the norm provider and the soft power, including in many conjunct operations that were that saw participation from the EU and from NATO. We've seen the devise of tasks in between them. So how do you see basically the possibility of consistency in building the European third day in defense, given the internal European divergences, more so than the negotiations we would need to have with our American allies?
I think it's important to return to the recommendation by the American president to the Europeans 2 or 3 years ago, expand your budget in defense. It was not said maybe in a very positive way as I diplomatically outline it, but it was a message. Do your job in budget defense. And I think it's very important because otherwise EU will not be a pillar of the NATO. And of course, France advocates that the reinforcement of the European defense is not as such as an objective which would be totally specific. It is in order to be more credible and more legitimate in the NATO and the transatlantic security and umbrella. That's why it's very, very important to continue, and I think we have a margin of progress, to continue in the decision within Europe on innovation, technological development as far as defense is concerned. We have some tools, we have some elements. Of course, the pandemic has changed a little bit the priorities, and you have acknowledged that in the economic plan, recovery plan, defense has been a little bit abandoned, not abandoned, the word is too strong, but has been a little bit forgotten. For good reasons, because there were other priorities, but it's very important to continue what we have undertaken, and especially on the European Defence Fund, in order to gather our technological innovations and to promote more strength in that matter. There is a willingness. There is a problem of means for the time being, and a financial problem, but this is really key in order that Europe meets the challenges that are the one of the security. And we know that NATO cannot do much if Europe under its umbrella is not stronger. So it's very, very important to continue the dynamic we have launched. It is a recent one because it has 7-8 years long only. It's not very long, but we have some tools, we have some structures. And I'm very glad to see, for example, Portugal and France sharing the same objective to reinforce all these tools. And I know that during the presidency, Portugal will have next year of the EU. This element of European defense is one of the priorities of the country. And of course, we support these initiatives, we support this objective, because even in a moment in which other priorities are on the front page, it's very important to continue this dynamic of reinforcement of European tools for its security.
Madame Ambassador, I would like to carry on this, because in fact, essentially, I was wondering about what you were saying about the challenge of digital sovereignty. And as you were talking about it, and I'm very interested in this personally, I was wondering if it wasn't too late, but precisely we've got a question by a student at the Political Institute from Antonio Cebola, and he's saying the digital transformations can have an important role on security and defense. What can the EU do to control future problems? So in fact, this is blending our two questions, wondering if fundamentally we are not already overtaken.
Of course, during the campaign for the European Parliament, transition in climate change has been the main focus, one of the main focus. And of course, it has been very important in the vote of the young generation, which has been more important than in the past elections. And it has been very important in the strategic plan by the Commission, which has been elaborated just after the election. But this plan has two there are four objectives, but the two main, which are exactly at the same level, is climate change, energy transition, and digital transformation. You're right, we are less, for the time being, we have been less developed in the digital transition. I think we discover recently within the European countries the importance to be more articulated and to create a sovereignty on that. It's a recent awareness, but once again, the proposals made by the President of the Commission in his last speech are very important, and we have to work collectively on many levels. infrastructures, the data, and it refers to the question of your auditor, the data and their protection, and the networks. So there are 3 levels, and she was absolutely specific on 3 levels, proposing, it will take some time, of course, but proposing new initiatives in order that EU can be a real actor in the 3 dimensions. And of course, the data is very, very important. We already know it, we already see it, but more we will develop the digital world, and the pandemic has played a role in that regard. Otherwise, we would not have been in this virtual historical conference. But it has, you're right, it has in itself some threats, challenges on which we have to work in order to develop more the digital world, but without being weak, dependent, and less articulated on the protection of data. And of course, it is a geostrategical challenge because we know perfectly that some other partners are much more advanced in that regard and much more prepared than we are. That's why the different proposals by the Commission, we are waiting for them with a great interest, with a great attention, because it's absolutely key in the transformation of our economies, but in the transformation of our societies as well. But we would like that these transformations are going in the right sense. And of course, it has something to do with the values I outlined at the end of my intervention.
Yes, thank you very much. Those, of course, are the liberal values of Europe. Yes, absolutely. Cynthia, yes, you've got a question. You've got another one, please.
Yes, it's actually a follow-up. Well, I want to highlight a point concerning European sovereignty and liberal democracy, and also because the topic of this specific edition of the Estoril Forum is also the new authoritarian challenges to liberal democracies. And now we're speaking about the digital world and the move to digitalization. Let's take an example and the big choices to be made with regard to the debates regarding the 5G and Huawei. Here again, with other many examples that I can bring to you, we see the cost of European divergence that might become prohibitive on this level, as it is, for instance, on foreign policy and defense. We've seen the Germans making a choice, the French making a different choice. Well, the UK is not to be considered at the same level, but also the UK saying in the beginning one thing and now changing its mind. We see that there is no alignment, and especially there is no deliberation, there is no debate or in common procedure, and we know that it will have implications in the future. What do you think about that?
No, you are completely right. I share totally your assessment. It's absolutely key for the future. The current situation is not satisfying. There has been some opportunities for the head of states and governments to discuss that at the European level. For the time being, it has not led to a common point of view. That's why the announcements by Ursula von der Leyen last month are very important, and really it is Commission's responsibility to put on the table some tools, some regulatory, maybe, some actions in order to reconcile or concile positions by member states. I think for the time being, it has been a little bit ideological. Maybe if we have on the table some tangible proposals on infrastructure, because 5G, it's really the three levels. Huh? It's infrastructure, networks, and data. It's not only one of them, it's a mixture of the three. That's why maybe, I do hope, that if we have on the table some very precise proposals, it will help the member states to discuss not on a very large and general spectrum, but more precisely, more concretely, and I do hope that it will help some common position. It's not easy, we are not naive, but at the same time, it's so crucial in industry, in defense, in the protection of society, that it would be really a collective failure if we don't succeed with the time requested to find a common ground. So maybe we won't be able to go very far, but at least to have a common understanding of the challenges and of the ways of solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madame l'Ambassadeur, there is a last question by a student that is very interesting. It's a question from Joao Payne, who is an MA student at the Political Institute, and he writes, beyond its international security, how can Europe also defend its cultural heritage in the face of so many identity confrontations?
It's a difficult question to end the panel, but at least there are many initiatives and organizations. UNESCO, of course, which for the time being is still alive, despite some decisions on it. And we have acknowledged after the destruction in Syria, Africa, Yemen, we acknowledge a great sensitivity at international level within the civil society, the NGOs, and the member states. So I think this is seen, maybe unconsciously, is seen, the cultural heritage is seen as a part of our collective transnational patrimonium, and I would not be too pessimistic. Really, there has been some reactions. There have been some international generosity actions. Let's see. It has nothing to do with the war, but let's recall the wonderful international reaction when Notre Dame burned. We have had millions and millions of euros collected with a generosity by many citizens. And of course, you remember when the Syrian sculptures have been destructed. There has been a wonderful reaction. So we have some institutions, we have a sensitivity, and I think, of course, it has to be organized, but I think this is considered as a vital element of the collective DNA.
Perhaps also I would add that to this question is that the liberal values of Europe are also based on an understanding of value pluralism, and that essentially, perhaps this is also our duty to actually, through debate, set up and understand those confrontations. I mean, that's perhaps what I was thinking too.
Exactly, and you're totally right. And the fact that the international civil society reacts to a patrimonium which has been destroyed, or in either in Catholic dimension or in totally non-religious dimension is really the sign of this sensitivity to pluralism, to diversity, which is one of the key elements of this European third way I stressed.
Right. I mean, I would like to add that, I mean, yesterday, Ivan Krastev, who is writing this book on reflections on the role of the pandemic in Europe, he said that European citizens realized during the crisis that nation states need the EU in order to remain relevant in the world. And I feel that perhaps this is a good quotation to end our panel. I mean, would you like perhaps to say a last word, or Cynthia, but Madame l'Ambassadeur, of course, you first.
No, I think this quotation is quite wonderful to end the panel. It's so right and so reasonable. Yeah.
Yes.
If you allow me one word, Catherine, I would add to this, and also in relation with the question that was addressed, that maybe Europe has been seen until now as a provider of norms rather than values in an overarching manner. And for it to be able to stand for all the challenges you rightfully described, Madame, it would be needed that it starts deliberating on its values and agreeing on some of them, including action in foreign policy and defense. Yeah. The cost of divergence is becoming really prohibitive. When we look at Libya, Europeans are alone to deal with Libya, and we nevertheless are not acting on that level. It says something about our inability to set priorities and values.
But you're totally right, and I would like to end with a note. This question of values becomes more and more important, and if we consider the collective reactions France has received from all member states after the terrible assassination of the teacher in France, it shows that the values, the ideal are really getting more and more important. And my feeling is Europe has been built on norms and standards, but the future of Europe will be actions, tangible actions, as I said, but values at the same time. And it's really an element of our DNA now, which was less sensitive in the past, and more because maybe of this nuance we have. The family is less united than before, and the question of values could be a cement between us much more important than in the past.
Yes, thank you very much. So, I mean, Cynthia and I would of course, and the rest of the Estuarial Political Forum would really like to thank you, Madame l'Ambassadeur, for the time you took, for the amount of questions that you were met with, and thank you very, very much on behalf of all of us. It's been a great pleasure. So this is the time has come. This went really quickly, actually. Now, in fact, we're going to be faced with a 10-minute break. And for those of you who would like to carry on, at 5:20, there is a panel on China and the West, which comes, I think, very, very useful just after the conversation we just had. And so on behalf of all of us, I mean, we're going to finish perhaps a few minutes in advance, except if Cynthia wants to say another word, or if Madame l'Ambassadeur, you want to finish with a 50-second word.
Yeah. Now, thank you very much for having invited me. It was a great pleasure. I think the historical conference is very, very important in that. In general, but in that specific moment, it's really vital that we discuss together about the challenges we have. There is a level of uncertainty, a level of imprevisibility, which makes us much more attached to the reflection and discussions, because no one alone has the truth in his hands. And so it's very, very important. And I'm very glad, and thank you very much for your understanding and your bienveillance.
Thank you very much.
I hope that we can all meet again next year in the flesh in Estoril.
Yes.
And on that note, as the timer is counting down, I think it's about time to say goodbye. So